Oh. Oh, hey. I thought I fixed the sound and I started it all over again, and there we go. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Um, I saw in chat people saying that there wasn't sound, and then I pressed the little mic button, and I guess it didn't take because it wasn't working. Anyways, welcome to Comic Island. Thanks for joining us. Today we're reviewing Cable issues number 2 and 3. Overall, it's a pretty fun little series so far. Issue number one's a pretty good model for what you can expect out of the rest of the series. It has the same writers, Jerry Duggan, or sorry, same writer, Jerry Duggan, and Phil Noto doing the artwork. And they do a good job at kind of having Cable be its own little thing in the world of X Men comics. I don't think this series is my favorite series out of there, but it's not my least favorite either. It's pretty reliable so far. Jerry Duggan does a good job at really excelling in this world of Krakoan X-Men and taking Alan Hickman's ideas and just sort of running with them. And Cable's no exception to that. I hadn't pulled the issue number 2 earlier because I had kind of decided to just sort of leave it be while I had a ton of pulls in the last little month as the comic industry is kind of catching up from the pandemic. But I someone in chat was asking what my thoughts were on it, so this week I had a relatively light pull, so I went ahead and picked up issues 2 and 3 from Cable. Post Society is saying, I'm here, I miss older Cable and Nate Gray. Jesus, Nate Gray? Yeah. I, uh, I know, but I guess, I feel like he's consistently featured in this series, though, and it's kind of interesting how older Cable keeps turning up. So, on the whole, I think I would kind of recommend this series. Like I said, it's not the best X Men book in the world on its own, but as part of a larger complement of X Men books, you could do a lot worse than Cable. And there's some pretty fun stuff going on, particularly around issue 3. So, issue number 2 opens up with this little mutant couple living out in the US. It's quite an interesting issue that they're talking about because, on the one hand, the father, who is just a normal looking human, wants to move or is worried about moving to Krakoa because last time there was an island mutant nation with millions of mutants, things didn't end so well for them. But the wife, Stinger, presents as a mutant and doesn't like being stared at in and around the US and in human society. That she doesn't like how they are struggling to pay bills, insurance, mortgage, healthcare, all these things that really aren't an issue with the X-Men. And I think it's a pretty interesting issue. Like the way that Dad puts it, he's just like, can we just wait and see how things settle? Um, and he has a point there. But the point is, on the next page, they discover that their child has been kidnapped. So the two mutants lost their mutant child. Alejandra's saying the father is no human. He's an X-Men. Omerta. Yeah, I know. I was saying he's a human presenting mutant. The point being that he doesn't look that way, unlike Stinger, which highlights the difficulty between them and where he doesn't understand, which I think is a pretty interesting little scene. We then cut to Cable talking to these cops, and he kind of has a good point about how he particularly is sensitive to mutant children and babies being kidnapped. Understandable, given his history. And he kind of takes Esme of the Stepford Cuckoos out with him. They have a couple of fun little moments together. He asks if they telepathically talk to each other while he's with one of them, which they very much do, but she denies. Meanwhile, the space robots that were activated when Cable found that sword in issue number 1 are hurtling towards Earth. And while Esme and Cable are investigating the mutant baby being disappeared, these robots attack. We then cut to Cyclops also interviewing these cops. And I kind of like the scene because you can see the police's growing sense of frustration as they have to interview like more than one mutant. I was kind of on Cable's side at first when they were very dismissive of him, but when they keep showing up and you even get a little bit of their correspondence, you get the sense of why they just want to investigate this kidnapping and treat it like any other kidnapping. Though I think the X-Men have a point that it's not normal. And then the issue number 2 ends going back to Cable, old Cable, in some other time and place, with the robot dog clearly killing demons in some context or another. So issue 2 is pretty fun overall, as far as like kind of building into a new series goes. It does a pretty good job. It isn't bogged down by anything with like X's swords or any content quite like that. It focuses in on Cable's character and one of the Stepford Cuckoos, which I quite enjoyed, and we even get a little bit of Scott Summers' perspective on like Cable's kidnapping and why he also cares about this kidnapping story. Issue number 3 then opens with Cable kind of flashing back to him murdering his older self, and Esme getting a hint of that, like just through her telepathy, but she says they kind of gotta deal with these alien robots at hand, which they track down to some Arctic location. The robots have discovered that their planet was destroyed millennia ago and are currently debating how best to like conquer and use Earth to regrow their home planet. And that leads to a pretty cool fight between him and Cable, or like the 3 robots and Cable. And Cable ends up like slicing one of the robots' heads off, and eventually the robots kind of calm down and start talking it out a little bit. And they like these little alien robot things kind of have their own little personality and stuff, which I quite enjoy. And Cable talks about how he's a time traveler, so if he can get a time machine, they can go back and try and save their planet, and the Earth can remain preserved. And the robots kind of agree to entertain that, but they need to go and find old Cable's body to access a time machine because Cable doesn't have like a robot arm where old Cable's time machine was located. They go there and find evidence. Well, the grave is dug up, but it's also quite clear that Deadpool is responsible. And so pretty soon, young Cable is off to Staten Island, where I believe he and Deadpool like are meeting each other for the first time. It's a fun little scene. Deadpool is definitely like leaning towards like his comedy side, almost to a fault, because like he has a lot of history with Cable, and he's mostly just joking around here. But you get the sense that he kind of kept Cable's body out of sentiment. And then we get 2 really interesting pages of correspondence between old Cable and Deadpool, where we learn that Deadpool got the body specifically at old Cable's request, so that like Strife or some other villain didn't steal the body for their own nefarious purposes. It ends up being a pretty cute scene overall, once you kind of know the full context of it. And then we cut to what was already pretty like heavily implied from Cable and Esme's investigation, the perpetrators of the kidnapping. And it's part of that crazy cult that's been emerging ever since Krakoa became a thing. And they kind of worship the X-Men and carve X's into their faces. They seem, though they seem on the X-Men's side, they very much are brutal, dangerous, and can't be trusted. And they celebrate having captured this little mutant girl, baby. Alejandro says, like more the Lost Baby story than the Space Knights. Well, I absolutely agree with that sentiment. The Space Knight storyline was a fun little bit in the first issue, but now it kind of just feels like a distraction while the like Cable and Esme teaming up and investigating the disappearance of this mutant baby is pretty interesting stuff because it has that dynamic with the cops and Cyclops and all of that business. There's some cool stuff going on with the Stepford Cuckoos and Emma Frost, who's dismayed that all of them are dating Cable. And it is a bit of a farce or something where it's like, oh, Cable's so cool, he's dating the quintuplets all at once. However, it's all handled quite well in the book. It fits in with the larger themes of House of X, and the way the Cuckoos treat Cable in these more recent issues has me kind of, I don't know. I like this relationship because they clearly are toying with him. One of them comments they're gonna break his little heart. Another one thinks they can do better. Like it's an interesting kind of dynamic. And meanwhile, Emma Frost thinks that Esme in particular, who's kind of been focused on a little bit in this story and has some history across like the Stepford Cuckoos, needs heartbreak in her life. And Emma kind of really emphasizes that point, which I thought was just a little bit of a cool character beat to sort of slip in there. As far as the little cameo with Deadpool goes, like I said, I think it was a little too jokey for me at first, but it had that underlying depth that I kind of like Deadpool to have, along with his humor, and it was fun to like that they had the details of like him going to Staten Island, the Cable going to Staten Island to see Deadpool and such. Little things like that Jerry Duggan's good at, so it's no surprise, but I appreciate nevertheless. Um, it's no Deadpool number 6, which is like the other crossover between Deadpool and the X-Men, which I found a great deal more fun and squared Deadpool off against magic a little bit. That was great. But on the whole, I didn't dislike these Cable books by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, there's been some really cool X-Men series out there and stuff. I would definitely suggest if you are deciding between something like Wolverine or Cable for a solo series to start reading out of the X-Men line, I would definitely lean more towards Wolverine, but Cable seems stronger than like the more recent issues of X-Force, for example. So it's definitely not like the weakest out there either. I quite enjoy it overall, especially because Phil Nota's artwork is so good that it's got like a very relaxed, easy reading feel to it almost, just because the artwork's so easy to get through and he does action in a fun way, but also has very expressive characters that lead to the kind of series that has legs. Because I can really just look at Phil Nota's artwork and watch him doing all these different settings that Jerry Duggan kind of throws his way a lot for a long time within a series. Because what I mean by that is like we have these flashes to old Cable and they're drawn very differently than the present day stuff. That sort of thing works quite well for me. And that's where like the Space Knights were stronger in the first issue because we were flashing to like these ancient Earth battles that featured this alien knight going up against monsters on Krakoa's little sister island. That stuff was cool. But yeah, we haven't quite gotten anything quite like that from the first issue because that first issue it had that scene, it had them battling the monster, and then one of the mutant kids getting dosed and seeing it as like this elaborate cartoon thing. That really showed off what Noto can do. We get little bits of that in the more recent Cable issues, but nothing quite as fanciful as that blockbuster moment in the first one. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I do have a couple more books from last week to still review that I'll have to save for tomorrow as I'm starting to get a little bit more time on my hands again. So next up, we're going to talk about Empire Avengers number 3, the last book in that little tie-in series. And then I really am looking forward to talking about the Three Jokers series and my thoughts on that of the first issue, obviously. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks, Tevia and Alejandro, Poet Scotty, and everyone else for joining me. And we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.